Hi, welcome to the online version of the event taking place on Friday. I thought I would pre-record an overview from the first part of the summer school, and then consequently I will also record the second main part where I'm teaching academics and delegates the theoretical aspects of social media research. And in the first morning session, I'm going to introduce you to a number of different tools, theoretical tools to actually analyze social media data and different theoretical concepts. And then in the second part, I will show you the practical tools, the afternoon session. And this is the schedule of Friday's event, and this particular presentation relates to part one, theory and research methods. And I'll be talking about the rise of social media, the range of suitable research methods for social science, and so forth. As you are online delegates, you won't be able to take part physically in the practical tasks, but these are also attached to this email, and I strongly recommend that you also complete them after viewing this, either during the event on Friday or now. The second part, the main kind of lecture that I'll be delivering, will be on an overview of the different tools and how to actually analyze the data. And I'll be sending the practical assignments and all of the material to you, so hopefully you should have received that by now. In terms of the importance of researching social media, the last 10 to 15 years, I've been arguing, has seen a burst of different social media platforms. We can think of platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and so forth. And these platforms have brought with them a lot of innovation, especially over the last 5 to 10 years. The amount of features and technology that has come with these platforms has made it attractive for people to use them to connect with one another and so forth. And all of this innovation and more people using the platforms has led to an increase of data that's available as well, and that's been generated by these platforms. And what academics have done is begun to research these platforms, ask research questions of them, but also study how people are using these platforms by doing, for instance, qualitative research on the users and so forth. And specific methodologies have come to exist, which I'll be actually providing you an overview with. And if we look at the digital users in the world, there's around 7.6 billion people, as in the total population, and of those, there's 4.3 billion using the internet, which is a 57% penetration. Also interesting is the number of active social media users. So out of, say, the global population, there's a 45% penetration of active social media users. So that's a lot of people using social media platforms all around the world. And the use of mobile social media users is also a very large figure, 3.2 billion. And what's also interesting is in this slide is looking at the year-on-year change statistical indicators of whether people are using social media platforms more or less. And it appears that people are using social media platforms even more. So there's been a 9% increase from January 2018 to January 2019 of active social media users. And there's also been an increase of mobile social media users. So those are people who use social media devices on their mobile. That's also increased as so as the number of internet users, unique mobile users, and the overall total population as well. So those are just some indicators, and this report has been compiled by We Are Social and Hootsuite, and it's available online as well. Now, if we look at the number of active million social media users, there are a number of platforms that really dominate the most used user base. Facebook is the most used platform, over 2 billion, followed by YouTube, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. The top four are Facebook, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. They're all owned and operated by the same company, Facebook. Then we have platforms like YouTube. You could argue it's not a social media platform in the traditional sense, but it's classed in this analytics. Then we have other platforms like WeChat, and Instagram is there as well, image sharing, and that has grown over the last few years rapidly. So the use of image sharing, especially for certain demographics, has been really popular. What I just want to flag here is that Twitter is not the most used platform. So here we can see it has 330 million users, but Twitter, in terms of academic research, attracts the most academic research. And then when we look at things like Google Scholar citations and what articles are being published, Twitter really dominates, but it's not the most used platform. And I mentioned earlier a burst of social media platforms, a burst of digital data, a burst of people going online and sending messages to each other, purchasing products and so forth. What all of these actions are doing is leading people to create more and more data. And this infographic shows what happens in an internet minute. So in every minute on Facebook, there are 1 million people logging in. There are 18.1 million text messages that are sent. 4.5 million videos are viewed on YouTube. 87,000 people are tweeting, and there's 4.8 million GIFs sent as well. So that's a staggering amount of data every minute, and all of this data can be analyzed, but academics only have access to certain public data. For instance, all of the data on Twitter is publicly accessible, whereas some of the other platforms, it can be a little bit more tricky to actually get the data and analyze it for insight. So in the second part of this event, I'll be talking a bit more about some of the practical methods of actually downloading or retrieving data. And there are a number of different ways. But I'll also mention, although in some of these other platforms we can't actually get the data, for instance, Facebook might have a closed platform, what is possible is to study qualitatively the users of these platforms. For instance, actually interviewing people who use Facebook and asking them why they use the platform, why they are sharing certain information and so forth. So in other ways, all of these platforms are have the potential to be researched. Another issue that's arisen in recent years is around the possibility of social media and platforms, as well as online digital technologies, to host and spread fake news. So social media growth is increasing, and people are spending more time on these platforms, and so it's become vital to gain an understanding on various issues and topics related to this. In terms of what platforms can be researched, I touched a bit on this a bit earlier, but these are some of the platforms that have been researched and can be researched. So there's a lot of academic research, as I mentioned, on Twitter. There's a lot of academic research on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube. People are also researching forums, blogs, review websites, and so forth. In terms of previous research, there's been a lot of research studying how teachers and academics are using social media in their teaching. So you might have somebody actually doing a study and capturing data related to people using social media, for instance, Twitter, hashtags, Facebook in the teaching context. scholarly communication as well. Academics have researched how people share information on Twitter and Facebook, articles and so forth. There's also been a burst of health research on social media and Twitter as well. And I'll be talking a little bit about a case study of how I examine infectious disease outbreaks using Twitter data to gain in-depth views from the public. There's also been a lot of research around crisis and risk communication as well. So how social media platforms are being used in those critical situations. There's also been a lot of research looking at marketing as well. How are people in marketing using social media? Specifically, how if profits have any relationship with content being posted on social media, influencer marketing and so forth. Another interesting use has been looking at library and information services and examining how libraries are actually using social media platforms, whether they've seen any benefits and so forth. Politics and political uprisings as well. So social media has been argued to have been influential in the political sphere, and a lot of research has looked at whether indeed is social media influential in those types of circumstances. So those are some of the areas, and there's many other disciplines also, engineering, computer science, who are also using social media data in their research. So this is just a brief kind of overview of some of the areas, but there will be many more disciplines making use of this data. And before going in and explaining some of the different methods, things like content analysis, thematic analysis, ethnography, and so forth, I just wanted to give an overview of an example of how I conducted a study looking at infectious disease outbreaks on social media, and I wrote a PhD thesis from this study and then went on to publish papers as well. And my argument was that infectious disease outbreaks might have and lead the public to having views and opinions about them, and that the online world is a space for people to share their views and opinions, and they're really going to be unfiltered. And there's not been too much research on social media using, say, in-depth methods to actually analyze the data. So that was my kind of overall argument, that people talk about infectious diseases, they tweet about them, and that there's no interviewer bias potential, and that this is an important study to conduct. And then I argued in terms of gaps in previous knowledge. I said that previous studies on Twitter mostly use quantitative methods, and I'll be using an in-depth qualitative method. And I argued that by using an in-depth method such as thematic analysis, which I'm going to explain later, is that there'll be more potential to uncover more themes and provide greater insight into data. And I set up with a number of research questions. So I was asking, what does the analysis of social media data tell us about how people communicate about disease outbreaks? What similarities and differences emerge when comparing how people respond to infectious disease outbreaks on Twitter? What are the advantages and limitations of using Twitter data to provide in-depth insights into how citizens communicate about infectious disease outbreaks? And what characteristics have enabled Twitter to thrive in the field of health-related public research in comparison to other social media platforms? So you can see here the very exploratory research questions, and this is just an overview, an example of a research study, how you can design a study in similar ways. So the first question is asking, what are people communicating, and what does this tell us? And are there any similarities and differences compared to different topics? So if I have one case study on swine flu, one on Ebola, when I compare the two, are there any similarities and differences? I also added some theoretical aspects, and this is similar to traditional social science research. So I said my study was pragmatic, elements of interpretivism, mostly qualitative. I used the health model, health theory, health belief model, and then I selected concepts around information theory, such as information needs, information seeking, and then I applied these to the results of the study. I also selected sociological concepts such as the moral panic and the outbreak narrative, and then I applied these to the results of my study. So you can do this with social media research, where you will come up with some research questions and then select some overarching theories and so forth to apply to the results. In terms of methods, I selected 2-day periods, and I used Google Trends to identify peaks in web search queries, because research has shown a correlation between web search queries and Twitter activity. I collected 2 days for swine flu. The total was 214,000 tweets. I also collected 2 days for Ebola, and the total was 181,000 tweets. And the final data set was Zika, and it was 749,000 tweets. I then removed duplicates, near duplicate clusters, and took a systematic random sample of each of the tweets from the data sets. And I was left with 7,000 tweets for swine flu, 5,000 tweets for Ebola, and 2,000 tweets for Zika. All these tweets were then read and labeled, and then I came up with a number of themes and sub-themes, and then wrote up detailed qualitative reports. So this is a study looking just at analyzing infectious disease outbreaks on Twitter, and it's just an example for how you may design and conduct an actual study. In terms of looking at some of the similarities and differences in terms of the results, that I had a very rich set of results with a number of themes and sub-themes that emerge. So this is looking at the sub-themes from the overarching themes and then comparing them for Ebola and swine flu. And you can see when I analyze my tweets on this topic, because I had removed retweets, duplicate content and so forth, and I had the individual tweet unit, I was able to find a lot of detailed insights. So for instance, on for both Ebola and swine flu, we see that a lot of people were responding with fear and anger, but they were also responding with fear of travel. They were unsure about how these viruses are transmitted. People were also using online technologies to actually monitor the spread of swine flu and Ebola. People were diagnosing themselves, so we had the theme speculative diagnosis and so forth. And I used all of this to argue that by using Twitter, I was able to find new insight that had not been reported in previous research. And so this slide actually shows potential new themes that actually emerged through my analysis that hadn't been reported in previous research and that hadn't come up in an interview or survey. And this is what some of the things people were saying. So that was really interesting. So one was specifically the fear of travel hadn't come up before. Maybe it was collapsed in other themes. One finding which is really important, and I went on to publish this finding, was that when we call H1N1 swine flu, people are really confused why it's called swine flu, and people are avoiding pigs and so forth. So it was confusing for users. I also looked at the Zika virus, and again I found specific themes that didn't overlap with the others. Things around the Olympics in 2016, debates around abortion and so forth. And these were a really rich set of findings which I was able to interpret and so forth. Now, I've provided just an overview of an example case study. I thought it'd be useful to see how I designed the study, what methods I used, how I analyzed the data, how I interpreted some of the findings. And in this section, I'm going to provide an overview of the actual methods that you can use to actually download and analyze social media data. So one method is known as content analysis, one is known as thematic analysis, there's network analysis, machine learning, and also sentiment analysis. And I will go through these different methods and provide some insight into them. Content analysis can be used for systematically labeling text, audio, and visual communication, and it often provides a numerical output. It's been used to understand narratives in newspapers, magazines, television, videos, and also the internet more generally as well. And in the context of social media data, it can be used to systematically label social media posts such as tweets. It's a popular method. So for instance, you can download a Twitter dataset, develop a code frame, and put those tweets in that code frame. And the code frame will be developed by exploring the tweets initially and any intuition that you have of some of the results that might come up. So here is an example of a study that I conducted where I placed Ebola tweets into different categories of a code frame. And my categories were resource, for instance, news article, general information. And then I had a category such as personal opinion, interest, jokes, parody, ambiguous, where we couldn't understand what the tweet or content meant. And we also had tweets related to marketing as well. So we had the category and then the frequency percentage. We found a lot of tweets on Twitter were resources, just tweets that are not really informative, can't be analyzed further. Then based on those tweets, so we will eliminate completely the tweets related to resource when we do a second round of coding, and we look specifically at qualifier categories. So we wanted to look at what other topics people were tweeting about. So for instance, if there was personal opinion and interest and jokes, parody, we want to actually categorize that further. So we found that other qualities that came about were humor and sarcasm, concern, frustration, misinformation, ambiguity, and so forth. So what you can do in content analysis is have one overall code frame where the tweets, Facebook posts go into them. Then you can have a separate qualifier category where the codes from above, for instance, personal opinion, if you want to break them down further, you can develop a second code frame and you can recode those. It just gives you a bit more insight into that. And you can also use methods such as intercoder reliability to give you reliability in results. So intercoder reliability will involve another person coding a subsample of your tweets, and then you will develop a statistic, and there's online tools for you to be able to actually calculate that. So I've provided a link, a reference to my study. I also looked at intercoder reliability, so you can check that paper out. Another method which is similar to content analysis, but it's much more in-depth, and it's what I used earlier when I explained my PhD thesis. It involves a rigorous process to locate patterns within data through data familiarization, coding, developing and revising themes. It's similar to content analysis, but it will involve labeling all data, for instance, all tweets in a data set. It's not as popular as content analysis for social media data because it takes a long time to actually devise and conduct, but it has the potential to provide greater depth and uncover more themes. So in this case, you will have all the tweets in the data set, and you'll have to individually label all of those and then develop your actual code frame based on the labeling. So for instance, if you have a tweet, you can put a label next to it, humor, second tweet, anger, and so forth, and then you will read those and then develop some themes from that. And this is typically how a thematic analysis finding may look like. So as you can see in my previous content analysis results, I had a small table with all the tweets that were coded. Here we can see, because I've used thematic analysis, there's much more themes, many more themes, because I had to label each of the tweets themselves and read the entire data set. It's a really rich set of results. And I've also provided a link to the published study where I did some of this research. Other methods also exist. So because content analysis, thematic analysis, these methods take a long time to devise and conduct. What people have done in, say, computer science is use methods such as machine learning, a type of artificial intelligence which allows computers to learn without being programmed. So it could involve humans labeling a subset of data, and the computer will learn the rest and then code your data for you. It's useful, and it's used in a wide variety of research because of the volume generated from social media platforms. Another method which is worth mentioning, and it's also gained popularity for similar reasons as machine learning, is that sentiment analysis can be used to find out whether a piece of text is either positive, negative, and neutral. And it's possible to use existing word lists. For instance, one tool I'll be showing in the afternoon, NodeXL, has a built-in negative and positive word list which can be edited, and the language can also be changed, and then it can be applied to a data set. And it's useful because it allows you to gauge how people feel about certain topics and events in real time. It can also be used on historic data as well to see how many people were tweeting in positive ways and how many were in negative ways. One algorithm which has been really popular is known as Centistrand, and you can go online and search for the Centistrand algorithm, and it allows you to copy and paste say short unstructured text into the program. There's also a desktop version as well, and it will give each text a positive strength and a negative strength. So you can add in tweets, you can add in Facebook posts, and so forth, and it will automatically give it a ranking and a rating. So here is an example of a piece of text which says the weather is absolutely amazing. This has been given a positive strength, this phrase, the weather is absolutely amazing, a positive strength of 4 and a negative strength of -1. And the outputs will range from 1 not positive to 5 extremely positive, -1 not negative to -5 extremely negative. So you can actually apply this to social media data sets. Issues arise because of the potential issues of accuracy. If you are coding large amounts of data and you've not been careful with how you've developed your word list, and there's no one else double checking the findings, it can be less accurate than, say, doing some type of content analysis or thematic analysis. Another method that's become really popular for analyzing social media data is known as social network analysis. And social network analysis is the process of investigating social structures through the use of network and graph theories. So you can actually cluster different topics on Twitter into different groups and look at the types of content those groups are sharing. And it's been popular for analyzing Twitter because Twitter actually provides you with all of the data that can be analyzed, and you can see the relationships between different users. In terms of key terminology within social network analysis, we will have nodes which act on which relationships act. We will have edges, so relationships which actually connect those different nodes. Social network analysis has got a lot of and wide range of disciplines that have actually used this methodology. So you can find it's been used in academia and in industry. It's been used for business intelligence, in business intelligence, for identifying influential people and so forth. It's also been used in intelligence, counterintelligence, and by law enforcement. If anyone has seen season 3, episode 7 of the television program The Wire, they actually conduct some social network analysis in the show, where they look at a criminal's incoming and outgoing calls and identify him as an influential member in a drug dealing campaign. There are a number of very useful books on social network analysis. So the book on the leftmost side, Analyzing Social Media Networks with NodeXL, Insights from a Connected World, provides you with an introduction into social network analysis using the software tool NodeXL. Takes you from a very basic kind of understanding and knowledge to a more advanced understanding and knowledge. The book in the middle, Social Network Analysis, John Scott, it's kind of a more general overview of social network analysis, as is the book on the rightmost side. And this is just an example of a social network graph, a simple social network graph, which shows different workers in a factory and their relationship with each other. Very simple kind of overview from 1939. With this social network graph, I often ask participants what you think the most influential user is in this network. So I'll just give you a few minutes to think about this. So I'll just repeat that one more time. So I'm asking which user or users in this particular network are the most influential. So I just gave you some seconds there to think about a possible answer. So in this particular network, 2 users are most influential, and they are influential by different means. Liz is most influential by the metric of betweenness centrality. Jill, who is in the middle of the users, Jill, is the most influential user by the metric of degree centrality. So you have Jill, degree centrality, Liz, betweenness centrality. The reason is that if we remove Liz from the network, we will lose Alan and Lisa. If we remove Jill from the network, we will not lose those other people. But that metric is betweenness centrality. That's the most important one. Whereas by degree centrality, Liz doesn't have the most connections, but Jill does. So I'll give you some further examples. Here is a visual representation of betweenness centrality. We have the user with a larger node because they're bringing in 2 further users into the network. That is known as betweenness centrality. Then we have degree centrality, which looks specifically at which users have the most connections to each other. This is a software used from many years ago, which actually calculates the influence of users and puts them into a network. And I want to draw your attention to the top right hand side, which actually shows you which users are influential by degree centrality, by betweenness centrality, by closeness centrality. And when we produce these analytics and analysis, we will often get a numerical output showing you who is influential by degree centrality, by betweenness centrality, by closeness centrality, and so forth. Those numbers are relative to each other, and we can report those in, say, academic research. This is just a further example where the node is the circle and the edges, which is what connects the two nodes. And in the second part of the event, I'll be asking you to interpret these graphs and so forth. So it's important just to know some of these terminologies. This is a example of another network graph, just to show you that Heather here will be most influential by between essentiality, Diane by degree essentiality. So I hope you're getting the hang of the different metrics and why they're important. In recent years, there's been new methods for analyzing social media data. And one method is known as netnography, an online research method, and it's been adapted from ethnography. And netnography refined, published in 2015, is a very useful book of a method, a set of tools to actually conduct online research, social media research, and so forth. So I'll be showing this video to delegates at the event. But in the email I've sent you, I've put the link there, so I highly recommend pausing this kind of lecture at this stage and then viewing this video and then coming back to it. Another method, a new method for analyzing social media data is known as digital ethnography. So an online research method adapted from ethnography, but it's very similar to netnography, but still different enough to be its own method. And digital ethnography principles and practice is also another book that I recommend reading. And this book and the other book, if you're a lecturer, you may be able to get inspection copies and so forth. In terms of netnography, which I outlined earlier, and I hope you watched the YouTube video from the author who created this methodology, it provides a useful set of steps for conducting social media research. So it suggests that we should define the research field and develop our research questions. Once we have got the research questions, we should then look for online communities to research. And when we are researching online communities, we can retrieve data. So we can download data, web scraping we can use, or we can officially get data from using application programming interfaces. We can also write down our personal observations based on the online communities we are observing, and then also conduct interviews as well. So we can do online interviews, we can do in-person interviews, and so forth. Then we can analyze the data using automated or manual means, content analysis, thematic analysis, machine learning, sentiment analysis, and so forth. Netnography will also tell us to be aware of and respect research ethics, or respecting participants and so forth. And when we are writing our findings, we want to develop a deep and empathetic understanding about the topic of interest. So these are some of the steps. And in the practical task that I'll be giving you, you'll be following some of these steps to actually define and come up with your own research idea, research around social media, online communities. And then in the second part, we're going to build on that first task and help you to identify the different software tools that you can actually use. I will also just flag here that I'm asked often about social media research theories, conceptual frameworks, and so forth. So I'll just give you this reference, this citation to this paper titled Social Media Research Theories, Constructs, and Conceptual Frameworks, which was published in the International Journal of Information Management. And it looks at all theories and models ever used in social media research, accurate to of 2015. So things like attribution theory, theory of planned behavior, social interaction theory, social power, social ties, media richness theory, and so forth, and the articles that actually use those theories. So if you're not sure which theory to apply or which theory to use, you can actually use this list and find some of the previously used theories and then apply those to your own research. So I showed you earlier how I framed social media research study, and it was titled Using Twitter Data to Provide Qualitative Insights into Infectious Disease Outbreaks. And these are just the citations related to those works. So if you're interested in building your own kind of study and you want to see how others have done it, these are just some examples. So it's PhD thesis, and also I thought I would just put in those references in there. In terms of coming back now to social media overall, in terms of the benefits for social media research specifically, it was beneficial for me to study infectious diseases on Twitter because it allows you to view public comments and opinions in real time. It gives you access to unfiltered public opinion, which you may not pick up in an interview or survey. And platforms such as Twitter can be argued to have a strong hold on society, mainstream media, and so forth. For instance, if someone tweets something controversial, it may come on the television and so forth through news, for instance. In terms of limitations, so I've been talking about a lot of the benefits of social media research, but there's limitations around that the data may not be representative of the national offline population. There's also going to be issues around information quality, so there's going to be a large amount of link baiting in popular hashtags, and my practical task will actually show you a data set, and it will show you some of the difficulties of analyzing that. There's also limitations of cost as well. So historical Twitter data going back more than 7 days in time becomes really expensive to actually obtain and manage. There's also going to be a number of ethical implications as well. So collecting and retrieving data from large data sets may not be possible to actually get informed consent from all of the participants because there's so many users of these platforms. Other limitations, legal implications, sharing data sets, web scraping may go against the terms of service. Coverage of data sets, for instance, certain keywords, hashtags, might not be able to bring you all of the data. And there's likely to be a number of unknown, wider methodological issues around using social media data, in particular Twitter data, that at this time we just don't know about. There's also going to be very specific challenges as well. Tweets are very short, and it could make it difficult to interpret the meaning of users. Other limitations are the difference between the online and the offline world, and so forth. In my study, I mentioned contributions were around sociology, applying the outbreak narrative, moral planning, and then critically considering the potential of Twitter for gaining this insight. So when you're designing a social media study, you can think of what contribution it gives, what theories you've applied, and so forth. So this is just showing you how I actually wrote about this. So I said it was the first study to use an in-depth methodology, and then I uncovered new discussions on swine flu. And some of the papers I review on social media, those which argue some of these aspects tend to do well in the review process, but you can actually show where you've contributed, what your findings have done, and how it connects to previous research. I thought I will just take this last bit of the theoretical overview just to look at the wider debate on and around social media data. So I've chaired and hosted a lot of discussions around the benefits, limitations of social media data more generally, and some of the questions that are raised, and that could possibly feed into academic research as well. So there's been clear benefits of social media research in marketing. It's created a number of jobs, helped small businesses thrive. In politics and political change, it's been credited as being influential during political uprisings. It's led to awareness, so we can think of charity challenges, Ice Bucket Challenge for instance, and how it's been used to increase and raise awareness around the world. And we can also look at emergency and crisis situations. Data from social media platforms can be leveraged, and it's got the potential to save lives. limitations are around cyberbullying, mental health. So there's the issue of virtual bullying, potential negative mental health among users. Hacking, so people's identity has been stolen and they've started to release private photographs and information and so forth. It can also lead to addiction as well, because they've been designed for people to use them again and again and again, so people can become addicted without actually knowing. There's also a number of unknown effects as well, so there could be unknown uses and consequences of using social media platforms that we're just not aware of today. And when I give these talks and these overviews, some of the similar questions tend to arise. So one question is, do the benefits of social media outweigh the limitations? Is social media making us less social? Has social media had a positive or negative effect on society? What effect have social media had on our mental health? Have social media companies unfairly exploited our desire to connect with one another? Is social media going to change how people live their lives? So if you make a comment when you're young and naive 15 years ago, when you become an adult, that comment will come back. Is that going to change the way how people are living? I mentioned before, and I will talk about this in the practical aspect, although there's a number of social media platforms, one makes all its data available to academic researchers, and there's been a burst of research on this, and it's known as Twitter. Twitter has an open API, so anyone with an internet connection can retrieve data. It's an open platform where anyone can follow anyone, and you can request to follow other users. And it has a lot of metadata fields, so for instance, where the tweet was created, who was it sent to, in reply, what platform was it sent from. We can all use that data for academic research purposes. And the Twitter API is an application programming interface which lets you pull in data. And we can either use the search API, which is free, but it's limited to around 7 to 11 days going back in time, where the Firehose API is the paid, in theory, 100% of Twitter data, but it can be very costly. So I thought I would just give you some of this kind of technical information before leading on to the second lecture. How we retrieve data on Twitter: if we're using the search API, we can use keywords, Ebola, we can use hashtags, hashtag Ebola outbreak, or we can use a Twitter handle. We can also combine search queries using and/or operators, and there's also a number of other operators as well. There's also been innovative uses of social media in industry, for instance, personality insights by IBM Watson, where we can take someone's Twitter discussions and content, develop a summary about them, and then find out information. For instance, taking someone's Twitter profile, they might tell us they like historical movies, they read often, so we can target them with that information, with books, for instance, with historical movies and so forth. And what I will be teaching you in the second part of the event, kind of the practical tools, is the rise of software as a service tools, a number of online platforms and analytics such as brand media monitoring, consumer engagement, security, and so forth, how tools exist to actually monitor media, consumer engagement, and security, and how they can also be used for academic research. Another point I'd like to make as well is that all big data topics, hot topics, they can be studied fairly well by using social media data, blockchain technology, cryptocurrency. A lot of the people who are influencers around these areas and are writing about them also have Twitter accounts. So we can actually analyze this data and gain a lot of interesting insights from this analysis. So these are the main tasks. So working with 100 tweets on obesity to use my lecture material that I've provided you and to create a code frame and label each tweet using content analysis. And I've attached to the email with this video the actual tweets that you can label. Part 2 is to use thematic analysis. So I remember the difference between content analysis, where you have the code frame and you put the tweets into them. With thematic analysis, you need to assign a unique label to all of the tweets and then review them to actually develop a set of themes and sub-themes. I've also given you another task, which is to examine a simple social network graph and then identify the influential nodes. And then the most exciting bit, and we will use this in the second part, is to design your own social media study using an ethnography approach. So I've given you a sheet which you can complete, and then we're going to be using that in the second kind of lecture. So that's all for this course. As it's virtual, physically I can't take any questions, but during the event you can tweet on the hashtag, you can also email me and so forth. But thank you for listening.